Welcome to Unbreakable Truth. In today's video, we descend into the shadows that lie just beyond the edges of our ordinary lives. We're not just telling stories tonight, we are exploring the architecture of fear itself, the quiet dread of a missing friend, the chilling weight of a stranger's warning, and the terrifying realization that the world is not always as it seems. Prepare for a journey into the unknown, where every creak of the floorboard is a question, and every shadow holds an answer you might not be ready to hear. The fragility of normalcy. The human mind is a fortress, built brick by brick from routine, from familiarity, from the comforting rhythm of a known life. We host dinner parties. We take night drives with friends. We work late shifts, lulled by the hum of fluorescent lights. These are the walls we build against the chaos. But what happens when a single, inexplicable event strikes at the very foundation of that fortress? When a crack appears, so fine at first you barely notice it, but deep enough to let the cold, dark air of the unknown seep into your world. Tonight, we explore several such cracks. These are not tales of graphic monstrosities, but of psychological unraveling. They are about the moment a familiar face becomes a mask for something unthinkable, the moment a welcoming home becomes a trap, and the moment a simple act of kindness draws the attention of something else. Our journey begins not in a haunted castle, but in the most terrifying location of all, the comfortable, well-lit home of a man named Watson, on an evening that started with laughter and the smell of freshly baked bread, and ended with a mystery that would haunt him forever. Story 1, The Empty Chair. Watson's dinner party. The town was the kind of place where silence had a sound, the rustle of old oaks, the distant whistle of a train, the gentle sigh of a community at rest. For Watson, this tranquility was a canvas upon which he loved to paint evenings of warmth and connection. His dinner parties were legendary in their small way. The table was a masterpiece of domesticity, polished silver catching the last amber rays of the sun, crystal glasses standing like sentinels, and the air thick with the aromas of roasted chicken and herbs from his garden. That evening, the guest list included his inner circle: Sarah, with her easy laughter, Mark, the pragmatic thinker, Lisa, the empathetic listener, and John, the jovial heart of the group. And then there was Tom. New to town, Tom was a silhouette against the bright backdrop of Watson's friends. He was quiet, his smiles never quite reaching his eyes, a man carrying a weight he hadn't yet set down. Watson had invited him as an act of kindness, a thread to weave him into the town's social fabric. The dinner itself was a symphony of clinking cutlery and shared stories. Tom participated sparingly, a quiet audience member to the play of camaraderie around him. But as the evening deepened and they retired to the living room, cradling glasses of wine, a shift occurred. It was subtle, a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. Watson noticed Tom's posture stiffen. His gaze, once distant, became sharp, darting towards the windows, towards the darkness pressing against the glass. He wasn't just uncomfortable, he was vigilant. A silence fell over the group after one of Mark's anecdotes, and in that quiet, the sound of Tom's rapid, shallow breathing was suddenly audible. The convivial warmth in the room seemed to retreat from him, repelled by a cold anxiety that radiated from his very core. He stood up so abruptly his chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a sound like a scream in the quiet room. "I have to go," he muttered, the words not an apology but a statement of desperate necessity. His eyes, wide and glistening, swept over the group without seeing them. Before anyone could form a question, he was a phantom, moving swiftly to the door. The slam of it behind him was a period at the end of a sentence no one had read. The following days were a slow, creeping frost. Watson's calls to Tom went unanswered. His knocks on Tom's door were met with a silence more profound than mere absence. The police were polite, thorough, but their searches yielded nothing. Tom had evaporated, leaving behind a car, a half-unpacked life, and a void of questions. It was weeks later, alone in his own home, that Watson first felt the crack in his fortress widen. A rustle in the rhododendron bushes outside his window, too deliberate for a squirrel. The faint sensation of being observed from the inky blackness between the trees. Sleep became a fleeting visitor, chased away by the sound of phantom footsteps on the gravel path. Driven by a need for answers, Watson managed to gain access to Tom's vacant house. While the police had taken the obvious things, they had missed a small, leather-bound journal wedged behind a loose baseboard heater. The entries inside were a descent into a private hell. Tom wrote of feeling out of place, not just socially, but ontologically, as if he were an imposter in reality itself. The prose grew more frantic, speaking of a persistent watcher, a presence that stood just outside his field of vision. The final entry, scrawled in a shaky hand on the date of the dinner party, contained a sentence that froze the blood in Watson's veins: "It knows I've tried to connect. It feels threatened. The people around me are not safe. I must sever the ties. I must disappear before it decides to make me disappear, and takes them with me." Watson was left with a terrifying new understanding. Tom's sudden departure wasn't a social slight, it was a desperate, last-ditch act of protection. But protection from what? And the most haunting question of all, had Tom's disappearance drawn the attention of this unseen watcher away from his friends, and onto Watson himself? The darkness outside his window now felt intelligent. Patient. Story 2, The Smiling Mask. A mother's reckoning. Trust is the bedrock of human connection. We extend it freely to those we call friends, a currency of faith that allows society to function. But what happens when that trust is a carefully constructed trapdoor, and the friend you know is merely a smiling mask over something monstrous? This was the lesson learned in the most brutal way possible by a woman we'll call Helen. Her son, Alex, 20 years old, was bright and sociable. His friend, James, was a fixture in their home, a tall, muscular, dependable-seeming young man. One night, Helen was awoken by the sound of her front door opening. She found James in the living room, supporting a heavily intoxicated Alex. Alex was a dead weight, his speech slurred into nonsense, his eyes rolling back in his head. "Sorry about this, Helen," James said, his voice a pillar of calm in the minor crisis. "He just had a bit too much to celebrate." Helen's maternal concern overrode any frustration. Together, they hauled Alex up to his bed. James was strong, capable, and his demeanor was one of genuine concern. As he left, he even promised to check on Alex tomorrow. He was the perfect friend. For a year, that night was just a story, a minor footnote in Alex's young adulthood. Then, the foundation of their reality shattered. A news report flashed on the television: a young man found dead in a hotel room under gruesome circumstances. The victim had been checked in by a friend the night before. The police released a composite sketch of the suspect. And Helen's world stopped. The face on the screen, with its strong jaw and calm eyes, was unmistakably James. The details that emerged were a study in predatory calculation. James had a pattern. He would befriend a young man, gain his trust, and then one night, orchestrate a scenario where the victim would be rendered helplessly drunk. He would be the good friend, the one who safely checked them into a hotel room. But once the door closed, the mask came off. The crime was not a crime of passion, it was a cold, premeditated act of violence. The police confirmed their worst fears. James was a predator who used friendship as his hunting ground. The night he brought Alex home, he wasn't being a good Samaritan. He was performing a dry run. The most chilling moment came days later. Helen found Alex sitting in the darkened living room, the blue glow of the television casting his face in a ghostly pallor. He didn't look at her when he spoke, his voice hollow. "Mom," he whispered. "Do you think I was supposed to be next? Was that practice?" The question hung in the air, toxic and unanswerable. The trust they had placed in James now felt like a profound naivety. The familiar had been revealed as a cunning facade. James was eventually caught, tried, and imprisoned. But for Helen and Alex, the prison was now internal. The world had lost its safety. Every friendly smile now had to be vetted, every gesture analyzed for hidden malice. The monster wasn't under the bed, he was the one who helped you carry it. Story 3, The House That Breathes, a nighttime exploration. There is a primal urge in the human spirit to seek out the unknown, to poke at the boundaries of our safe world. For a group of 4 friends, let's call them Jake, Chloe, Matt, and Rachel, this urge manifested as a late-night drive to the town's most infamous landmark, the old Blackwood Manor. The house was a wound in the landscape, a Victorian structure succumbing to gravity and neglect. As their car bumped down the overgrown driveway, the headlights seemed to be swallowed by the sheer presence of the place. The windows were shattered eyes, the porch a sagging jaw. They entered through a back window, the crunch of broken glass under their feet a violation of a long-held silence. Inside, the air was thick and cold, carrying the scent of damp rot and ancient dust. Their flashlight beams were feeble swords against a darkness that felt solid, oppressive. They decided to split up, a decision that would later feel like a fatal flaw in a horror movie. Chloe and Jake took the upstairs. The master bedroom was a tomb. A large, 4-poster bed stood shrouded in a yellowed sheet, the shape beneath it unsettlingly humanoid. On a dust-covered vanity, Jake found a small, porcelain doll, one of its eyes cracked, seeming to follow them as they moved. Downstairs, Matt and Rachel explored the kitchen, where rusted cans littered the floor and a single, pristine teacup sat in the center of the table, a bizarre artifact of normalcy. The connection between the two groups was a fragile thread of shouted updates. Then, a sound echoed from the basement, not a random crash, but the distinct, heavy thud of a door being slammed shut. The thread snapped. The shouts from downstairs ceased abruptly. Chloe and Jake hurried down to find the main floor empty. The front door, which they had left open as an escape route, was now firmly closed. A new sound reached them, a low, rhythmic creak, 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 coming from a door under the stairs. A trapdoor, which had been sealed shut with rust, now stood slightly ajar, a yawning mouth leading into absolute blackness. Driven by fear for their friends, they descended the rickety ladder into the cellar. The basement was a cavern of forgotten things. In the far corner, an old lantern flickered with a weak, guttering flame, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. And that's when they heard it, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving across the floor above them. They were not alone. The footsteps stopped directly over the trapdoor. A silhouette blotted out the dim light from above. A tall, gaunt figure climbed down the ladder with an unnatural, fluid grace. He moved through the basement not like an intruder, but like a curator, muttering to himself in a low, guttural stream of words that sounded less like language and more like rocks grinding together. He stopped before a shelf of preserved specimens in jars, things that should not have been preserved. He picked up one jar, held it up to the lamplight, and then, with a slow, deliberate turn, his gaze locked onto Jake's. His eyes were not those of a madman, they were ancient, intelligent, and utterly devoid of humanity. A smile stretched across his thin lips, a smile of ownership. Panic was a fire alarm. They scrambled for the ladder, a frantic, screaming pile of limbs. The man made no move to run, he simply watched, his smile unwavering. As the last of them, Rachel, reached the top, a cold, strong hand closed around her ankle. It was only through their combined, terrified strength that they pulled her free, slamming the trapdoor and bolting it with a rusted iron bar. They fled the house, the sound of that calm, knowing smile burning in their minds. They had gone seeking a ghost story, a thrill. But the Blackwood Manor did not contain ghosts. It contained something worse, a resident. And as they sped away, they couldn't escape the feeling that their visit had not been an intrusion, but an audience. And he had been pleased to have visitors. The lingering shadow. These stories, though separate, are threads of the same dark tapestry. They speak to the fear of the unknown that lurks behind a familiar face, the terror of a trust betrayed, and the ancient dread of a presence in the dark that is aware of you. They remind us that the most profound horrors are not those that jump out and scream, but those that watch in silence, that twist the ordinary into the sinister, and that leave us questioning the very fabric of our reality. The mystery of Tom's disappearance was never solved. Watson still lives in his quiet town, but he no longer hosts dinner parties. The darkness beyond his windows is no longer empty. Helen and Alex rebuilt their lives, but the foundation is forever cracked, their trust a fragile thing. And as for the group of friends who explored Blackwood Manor, they never went back. But sometimes, on the clearest of nights, if you drive past the edge of town and look toward those distant, skeletal trees, you might just see a single, flickering light in an upstairs window. A lantern, perhaps, signaling that someone, or something, is still home. And so we are left with a question that is far more terrifying than any answer. When you feel the familiar prickle on the back of your neck, the unshakable feeling that you are not alone, is it just your imagination? Or is it simply that you have finally become aware of the thing that has been watching you all along?